Welcome to Drugs and Stuff, a podcast from the Drug Policy Alliance. And now your hosts, Tommy McDonald and Derek Rosenfeld.
Welcome into another episode of Drugs and Stuff. We're going to have a good time today. We're going to be talking NFL. We're going to be talking CTE. We're going to be talking activism. We're going to be talking marijuana. And we're going to be talking Marvin Washington. Derek, tell us about Marvin and why we're excited to have him here today.
Hey everyone, I'm super excited. Marvin Washington, former New York Jet, Super Bowl champ with the Denver Broncos. We met a few years ago. We've been talking about marijuana, the NFL, sports, activism, and what a week to be talking with him right now after this past weekend with a huge show of solidarity across the NFL against some of the comments that Trump made last week and fighting, Colin Kaepernick's fight that he started and this movement for the last year. And so it's just been we're really fortunate to have Marvin here with us today.
No, thanks for having me and giving me this platform because it's definitely been an interesting weekend. And I would say past 10 months, I think everybody that was sensible and a progressive was kind of shocked on November 9th with the election of 45. But I think it's good because if he's done one thing, he's united a lot of groups together that are fighting for, now they're fighting for the First Amendment right, which is freedom of speech and freedom of expression. And it's a good time and just thanks for having me.
Well, Marvin, anytime we get to talk to a world champion like yourself, it's a treat for us. And once again, welcome into Drugs and Stuff. This is the place where smart people talk about drugs. I'm your host, Tommy McDonald, and my tag team partner, Derek Rosenfeld. We're not the smart people. You're the smart person. So we want to hear from you and, definitely get your thoughts and your expertise. Let's jump right in. As a former NFL player, how did you feel about, number one, 45's comments about Colin Kaepernick and calling, guys who participate in activism SOBs? And just as a former player, how did you feel about the NFL's response, team's responses, and just the general story that unfolded over the weekend?
I was kind of as the weekend went on, and particularly Sunday evening and yesterday evening, kind of conflicted about it. But I was on my way to do the Don Lemon show at CNN. I was in the car, and the producer called me, and she read me his the statements by 45. And then when I got to the studio, I looked at him, and we were going to talk about CTE, which I still want to talk about, but. I saw the comments and I was taken aback. Number one, this is coming from the highest office in the land, and it's pretty much official statement when he says something like that. Number two, I was trying to figure out what was his end game at that moment doing that, because he has his base. And my thing is he trying to distract us from other things that are going on in the world, particularly I think John McCain had just came out and said he wasn't going to vote for health care, and I think his health care was going down. So that was another loss for him. We had North Korea declaring war, and our B-52 bombers were skirting the border of North Korea, and we had Puerto Rico, and there was a bunch of other things in the moment that I thought he should have been talking about, but he chose to attack players that were exercising their freedom of speech and freedom of expression. But it's just a pattern, because I believe earlier that day he had just disinvited Steph Curry from the White House. And then earlier that week, he went after Jamel Hill, who was also expressing her freedom of speech and trying to get her fired from ESPN. And so this is just a disturbing pattern to me of the people that he was attacking. If you look at their common denominator, they're all African Americans. And the third thing is that really got on my crawl is he's calling these players son of a bitches. And these are leaders of, they do a lot of good things, particularly with Hurricane Harvey and relief and that they're doing and fundraising that they're doing down in Texas and in Florida. But in Charlottesville, 5 weeks ago, the white racists white supremacists and the KKK, he nuanced that statement, number one, and it felt like he was reading a hostage statement, his first response. And then when he came out and showed his true feelings, he said they were fine people, but people that the majority of them, the great majority of them, do not get in trouble. The great majority of them contribute to their community and give back. The great majority of them have college degrees and have gone through college for 4 years and have caused no problems. And you calling these guys sons of bitches, you know? And the players that were kneeling at the time, Colin Kaepernick, who's given over $1 million of his own money to charity. Martell Bennett for the Seattle Seahawks, he gives to charity. And so these are good people, well-intended guys that are exercising something that is protected by the Constitution. And civil disobedience is how this country was started. Violent civil disobedience. So this is something that is as American as apple pie and hot dogs.
There's a general theme, you know, especially in the NFL. They want these guys to, you know, play and make big plays on Sunday, but keep their mouths shut. You know, there's the climate of, you know, stick to sports. And anytime you get out of line, you're silenced. I mean, I think this goes back to a couple of years ago when Eugene Monroe, you know, the former Baltimore Raven, began to speak up about his belief that marijuana could be used as an alternate treatment for chronic pain and, you know, players recovering from, you know, some of the horrific injuries, you know, that they're dealing with as an alternative to pain medication. As soon as he became vocal, as soon as he started getting press coverage, all of a sudden Baltimore's cap situation got funny. All of a sudden, you know, free agent visits weren't, you know, lasting as long. And it seems like he effectively got run out of the league quietly. I mean, Marvin, do you see that happening, you know, anytime your, you know, fellow players speak up?
You know, concerning Eugene Monroe, I know Eugene. I've known him since he's been in college. And for the layman fan and the people that don't know on the inside, it seemed that way. And particularly, you know, they were with Eugene win or tie. But I think, I know for a fact Eugene left some money on the table because he could have signed with another team and played, but he just decided to retire. But you're not far-fetched than that. And the biggest thing to me, and it's surprising me, is that I came from the era, and most professional athletes came from the era. It's like, it's all about winning. It does not matter if you're the first guy, the 45th guy, or if you're a first-round pick or an undrafted free agent. If you can help this team win, they're going to sign you. And so I was confident in February and March when the free agents period started that Colin Kaepernick would be signed. Now seeing what it is, and everybody saying, well, he's going to get signed, this, that, and the other. No, it's clear that he's being blackballed right now. And it's a form of silence for other players to step out of line. Because right now, first, second, and third team quarterback, there's about 91 quarterbacks on the NFL roster right now, active roster. There's no way in heck you're going to tell me there are 91 quarterbacks better than Colin Kaepernick. So this is a way of the NFL owners silencing dissent.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Kaepernick has deserved to be on a team, you know.
Since March, since February, you know. And but he's going to be okay. I think history's going to judge him kindly. And then his platform may be bigger than football. I know he wants to play football, and I believe next year he is going to get signed because NFL is showing solidarity. The coaches are showing solidarity.
I was surprised to see the Cowboys last night and that whole team with Jerry Jones on the field.
Exactly, but
totally
that's what 45 has forced us to come together. And so just like a few years ago, when the commissioner came down in the 7th round of the draft and put out some feelers and we're telling teams, please take a chance on Michael Sam. I think he's going to put out a feeler this free agent period to say, hey, somebody take a chance on Colin Kaepernick, you know. And Colin Kaepernick is just being in the line of tradition of the socially conscious athletes that I grew up with and I saw from Bill Russell to Tommy Smith and John Carlos and Muhammad Ali. And Jim Brown, and I don't know what the heck has happened to Jim Brown. That is a disappointment. But that's the way it was, you know? And so...
Let's talk about that, though, because in the past few years, before Marvin and I met, he was just getting into the issue with marijuana. And then, we started talking more about the broader drug war. And as we started talking about this, we were talking about, this was before, LeBron and those athletes were out of the ESPYs wearing the iCamp read shirts. This was,
Exactly.
we were talking about the disappearance of socially conscious athletes. And when you and Scott Fujita and Brendan Iambodejo got together, wrote that op-ed a few years ago talking about the NFL needs to rethink marijuana, and folks should Google that. It was on the Huffington Post, a great piece that really started a much more serious conversation about the marijuana policy in the NFL, how backwards it is, and how it's really tied to just this failed drug war thinking. And now over the last few years, we're starting to see more and more athletes speaking out. And can you just talk about the relevance, the importance of having athletes speak out, and why we should see more athletes kind of speaking out about criminal justice reform, the failures of the drug war, and if that's like the next issue that's coming?
Well, I think it's just a natural evolution, and I appreciate you guys giving us that platform to put that co-op into the Huffington Post, because I was just telling Tony Newman, it seems like it's been forever, but I think it was just like 4 years ago that we did that. But a lot has changed, and this thing is moving along fast. And going back to the socially conscious athlete, I think my generation, we kind of dropped the ball because we were more about branding and selling, sneakers and sports drinks and trying to get, a bigger market share for our individual brands. And I think the guy that, that led that period from the mid-'80s to all the way to the turn of the century was Michael Jordan. And they asked him why he wasn't politically active. And he said, Republicans buy shoes also. That, I think, was a missed opportunity because, like I said, we had these guys in the 60s and the 70s. And the thing why I think it's going to come back again is like every 40 years in this country, we have some type of revolution, counterculture revolution or industrial revolution from the 1880s to the Roaring 20s to the counterculture revolution of the 60s, but we haven't had one. And I think we're overdue. And I just felt the undercurrents of it, starting with, the shooting of unarmed black men and the protests that were coming. We had a new organization, the BLM, Black Lives Matter. You got Latinos that are going against 45 in the immigration push. And so I think this has become, it's awaking a sleeping giant. And athletes, I think they're going to speak more about it because they're not immune from this. Bennett from the Seattle Seahawks just a couple weeks ago was taken to the ground and had a gun put to his head. The officer didn't know that he was an NFL player and a multimillionaire. So that doesn't make you immune from the things that happen to people of color in this country. And so athletes, particularly people of color in the NBA and in NFL, they see their brothers, their sisters, their aunts, their uncles. And even if they don't, they're seeing Tamron Rice, they're seeing Philando Castro, they're seeing Walter Brown, and they're saying, that could be me. That could be my cousin. That could be my uncle. And so they have to speak. They're speaking out more, and this is truly the information age. So they don't even have to go into the locker room and have that platform. It's in their hand. Mm-hmm. It's in their hand.
Yeah, the policing issue, Colin Kaepernick was very, very explicit about why he was kneeling. And if you look at the connection between the militarization of police, where that money came from starting in the 80s, it is all rooted in the drug war. And it's just what they want to keep pursuing. And there's kind of, it can get lost in the messaging. Where this is historically rooted. And some people think that, this isn't our issue. Supporters of drug policy reform don't even know the history of this and the connection between the over-policing of Black and brown communities and the incentives that police have. And a lot of people just don't even see the connection there.
I have a friend that's in the black market with cannabis. And that's what they're doing. And I don't judge people. And I think it's a plant. I think it's harmless. Whether it's a victimless crime or whatever, I'm not going to get into that. But one of the things and he's been in the business for a while, and so he gets his cannabis from California, and I'm asking, how have you been doing this so many years? And he has a middle-aged white lady that drives it across country twice a month, and hasn't been stopped once in 15 years. Hasn't been stopped once in 15 years. I had another buddy that was trying to get his master's degree and was bringing 2 pounds from El Paso and got busted in Tennessee, and they kept him in there for 3.5 years. So they're on the lookout for us, and this started, it was intentional. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean that they're not after you. When you go back to the etymology of Richard Nixon starting this drug war, he wanted to go after 2 groups. He wanted to go after the hippies that were protesting the Vietnam War, and he wanted to go after African Americans because he was prejudiced. And despite the Schaefer report that came out that said marijuana was harmless, it had medicinal benefits, it was non-addictive, it was non-toxic, yada, 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 he still put on a Schedule I drugs. And then next year in 1972, when it became a Schedule I, after it became a Schedule I, 33 African-American people were arrested that year, and the number kept going up. And then we had Reagan's, he's the one that started the militarization of this deal, and he's started his war on drugs, and his answer was just say no.
And just yesterday, some new numbers came out, and even though that marijuana is legal in all these states now, over 500,000 people were still arrested in 2016. It cost nearly $500 million to do it.
Marvin, do you think there's a general sense from athletes that they are under attack, not only, now with a renewed emphasis, from the president, but bearing the brunt of, drug arrests, because these guys are young guys with, a lot of money and trying to, have the audacity to enjoy their lives and the fruits of their labor. Do you think guys, feel like they're targeted, for arrests that maybe turn up some of these searches?
I believe so. And I believe athletes, and even myself, we felt like we were under attack because of resentment. They think that we're getting paid millions of dollars, which they're resentful for. And so we're supposed to keep our mouth shut, and we're entitled. And I call BS on that, because all of my money and everybody that I played with and everybody that I'm playing with now, they earned it. That's their hard-earned money, and they earned it. And so they want to look at the millionaires, but not the billionaires. And they're saying we should be grateful for these guys paying us all this money. They should be grateful for us for letting them make all that money. It's not, they changed our financial position, but we changed theirs, because Jerry Jones, since he's bought the Cowboys, the value of the Cowboys has gone up about 300%, and they're the most valuable sports franchise in the world. And that would not have happened unless it was Emmitt Smith and Charles Haley and Leon Lett and Michael Irvin and guys like those that helped him win those Super Bowls and raise the profile of that team. Same with Robert Kraft in New England. They played in a glorified high school stadium. But if it wasn't up for the sweat and blood and tears of the players, none of that would happen. So we're making them a lot of money. And this thing about the drug war, the failed drug war, and you're talking about people that are arrested, my thing is, what are the percentage of people of color, particularly African Americans? Because we're up here in New York City, which is supposed to be a liberal, progressive city with a progressive mayor. But there are still people of color in the Bronx and Brooklyn and up in Harlem still getting arrested 5 to 7 times more than their counterparts for this plant. And this thing can have an effect on their lives because it goes into their record. And so it can stop them from getting an education and job for this plant that's legal in 29 states.
And let's talk about the sacrifice the players are taking. I mean, you're talking about, all the whatever, the owners are getting out of this. But let's talk about the impact of the game on players and the health of the players and how marijuana can be related to that.
Something else that was lost in that was 45 was talking about, I saw a great hit. And this guy got hit, and the referee throws a flag, It was a great hit. They're making the game soft. Well, it was probably a hit on the defenseless player leading with his head. And so if he thinks the game is being solved and it's not being tough enough, then maybe I should show him, or he should have a meeting with some of the players that are suffering from chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, which comes from repeated hits to the head, which is the NFL's industrial disease. Maybe we should show him Aaron Hernandez's brain. And the thing about Aaron Hernandez, I called it 3 years ago when he was first arrested. And then I started reading the stories about him. I said he probably has CTE.
A little context before we go deep into that. Lost in all the coverage with the protest over the weekend was the news that Aaron Hernandez, it was discovered in a lawsuit. Aaron Hernandez was diagnosed with advanced level CTE during an autopsy after his suicide. And, the condition of his brain was akin to a player well into his 60s. And Marvin, again, you've done a lot of work in looking into CTE and the effects, that it's having on former players. Just talk a little bit more about that and how you received the news. You said you called it?
I called that. I believe he was suffering from CTE by reading and these anecdotal stories about him. And for me, it's kind of personal, and it's kind of strange because when Aaron Hernandez first went into prison, I met Aaron Hernandez, so I knew 4 of the guys in prison from the NFL that were in there for violent crimes. There was Anthony Smith. I played with him during the preseason with the Broncos. He didn't make the team, but he spent about 6 months during the offseason workout through the preseason. I spent an offseason with Eric Naposki, who former New Orleans Saints, New York Jets, whatever. He's in state penitentiary now for murder, a contract hit. I also played with Lawrence Phillips, who classic sign of CTE. Even when I look back at it, he was brain damaged. But he was in there for a violent crime, and then he committed suicide last December. And when he committed suicide, I called Dr. Bennett Amalu, the guy who discovered CTE. I said, get his brain.
He has an op-ed today. I just saw, I think it was in, I can't remember, Fortune or I just saw it about 2 hours ago, talking all about, why we shouldn't be surprised about Aaron Hernandez, the findings of Aaron Hernandez.
But I called it. And I'm not saying everybody that has CTE commits murder.
No, of
but
course.
The ones that have committed murder, they have CTE.
Yes.
And so this is something that unless the NFL gets their hands around this and solves this issue, because despite everybody saying there's been a concussion settlement and they're going to play these players all this money, CTE, all the symptoms and behavioral issues have been written totally out of it. So that's like me having being a coal miner and making a settlement with the coal mining industry, but they leave black lung disease out of that. So eventually the NFL is going to have to do this because, real quick, I'm going to give you some stats, is that football youth participation is down across the nation. It's down 10% over the last 10 years in Texas. It's down 10%, the last 10% in California. That may not seem big, but those are 2 states that produce the most NFL players with Florida, and it's down in Florida too. And in Texas, that's really huge. Because when I grew up, there were 2 sports in Texas. There was football and there was spring football. And so it's a big deal, man. It's a huge deal in Texas. And so people ask me about the game. I say, I don't want to kill the game. I just want to make it safer. And I don't think it's going to come safer from some helmet or equipment or mouthpiece that they're making. It has to come through science. And the science that I know about says that CTE is an antioxidant and neuroprotectant for the brain. In relationship
CBD.
to CBD
right.
is an antioxidant neuroprotectant for the brain in relationship to CTE. And I want the NFL to follow this science because I believe it can save their game. Because unless a coach can come down in your living room and sit you down and tell them they want little Tommy or little Derek to play football, and you can ask them this question and they can say affirmatively no, can you ask them, if my son plays football, will he leave this game with a disease? And CTE is a disease.
Yeah, so let's just back up 1 second. So CBD, for folks who don't know, is the kind of non-psychoactive part of marijuana that, there are dozens and dozens of cannabinoids that are parts of the plant, some that we still haven't even discovered and don't know anything about. The two biggest ones that we know the most about are THC, which folks know gets you high, CBD, very responsible for most of the pain relieving properties that that marijuana provides. And what we've found out, and I believe the federal government has like a patent on this.
6630507 that says cannabinoid CBD is an antioxidant and neuroprotectant for the brain.
And that's like a mini, what folks say is kind of like a mini helmet for the brain. So it's like if somebody were to use some CBD prior to playing in a football game and sustain a head injury, it might be helpful in preventing some of that long-term damage.
It will mitigate
the
long-term and short-term damage.
I mean, it's just wild that the NFL doesn't want to look at this. In the years that we've been talking in the last 4 years or so, Marvin, Roger Goodell has said we want to follow the science and and if it's not enough to show all the federal government's data, the 29 states that have legalized medical marijuana, all of the studies out there that point to this. I mean, what is it going to take for them? I think it was just a month or so ago. Didn't the NBA say that they are inclined to legalize medical marijuana, pretty much allow players who live in states where it's legal to use it and not penalize them for using it? Why is the NFL so hung up on this? Do you think it has something to do with like the conservative nature of the league in general, where the owners stand? Because it sounds like the Players Association wants to make some moves.
You know what? I know the Player Association, this is a priority for them because they're looking for all types of answers. Also, cannabis. And I'm not saying CBD is better than THC and what have you, because there are plenty of cannabinoids in the plant. So I'm a whole plant spectrum type of guy.
Hear, hear.
But if there's ever a sport that should be an experiment with cannabis, it's football. And one of the disappointing things to me was when Roger Goodell was asked before the draft about marijuana. He said, well, we don't know about the long-term damage of smoking marijuana it's going to have on our former players, which to me was wow, because what about the long-term damage of playing football with your former players? But I was encouraged in July when it was announced that the NFL had reached out to the NFLPA to look at cannabis, marijuana, as an alternative to the opiates and pharmaceuticals that they're poisoning their former players with. And saying that is there's the safety issue with CTE, but there's an opiate addiction issue that keeps these people up at 410 Park Avenue and down in Baltimore at the Players Association, because former players are 4 times as more likely to abuse opiates than general society. And it is kicking general society's ass, rural or urban, especially in the rural areas. And in 8 states, in the Confederate states like Kentucky and Alabama and Louisiana, states like that 45 took, there were more prescription pills dispensed than there were people. But NFL players take them more than that. Mm-hmm. And so they have to get their hands around that, because Roger Goodell always wants to say, we're protecting the shield. Your former players are part of that shield. So you want them to be functional members of society. So I'm behind this because, number one, I'm a former football player. Number two, I'm an African-American, and we're 70% of that league. So that's a great number of people that look like me that can leave that game either brain damaged or addicted to opiates.
Marvin, tell us how you sort of wound up going down this path. How did you discover the wonders of the cannabis plant, and what sparked your curiosity and made you want to learn more and become, the expert in the field that you are, to where now you have 4 different companies? And tell us a little bit more about those companies, by the way, and what you're up to.
I had a lot of good teachers, and I came in this as a business proposition. But once I'm into something, the way I do it, I always do a deep dive into it, because I didn't know the difference between THC or TLC. And so I smoked in high school, and that was over 30 years ago, and we just had Bo and Cess. And so I stopped smoking in college and haven't smoked since. And to learn about the different strands and the medicinal benefits and the delivery system of that, the way that they're delivering, you can, take cannabis, was just fascinating to me. And so I started learning about on the legal side and reform side through the DPA with Derek and Tony and Ethan Nadum, and knowing about Ethan was, I took it for granted because he was an absolute legend. And if it wasn't for him, I don't believe this whole medical deal would have happened, because he definitely made it happen in California. And so I'm appreciative of that and the information that I got from them. And then there was cannabis nurses and doctors and always trying to learn. And so I was with this one company when you first met me. I'm no longer with that company because of their business structure, but I still want to remain in the industry because I got out 2.5 years ago for about 4 or 5 months. But number one, as a business, I want to work with good people. Number two, which should be number one, number one, I want to help people. Number two, it has to make good business structure. So I feel like I'm with some good companies. We're helping people and we're making a difference. And one of the companies that I'm with is Lenitive, which is Montel Williams' medical marijuana program. And I've been approached by plenty of people on the THC side and the medical side to join them. But listen to Montel, and he's talking about standardized testing, and make sure that it doesn't have no mold and it's extracted right and doesn't have any chemicals in it. Because this is something that you're going to give to your mother, your grandmother, your aunts, and your uncle, and they can get sick off of this unless it's being tested. So that's what Montel does, and he was at one of the first testing facility, state-endorsed testing facilities in the state of California. I'm with Isadal International. They're going to become a full pharmaceutical company, but they're dealing with CBD, and we have a wide spectrum of products. I have a joint venture with them, or I did have a joint venture with them, but I gave that up to become a part of the company of Isadal International, where I have sports infused, CBD infused water, sports drinks, tinctures, oils, whatever it is. We got gummies. We have everything. And so this is how interesting that this space is, because I call it a space and a movement, because we're not an industry yet, because we're not regulated yet on the federal level, like the alcohol industry, like the tobacco industry, like the trucking industry. So we're just a space and a movement, and the race hasn't happened yet. So my thing is to make sure that I have a good business structure so I can go out and help people. So I'm trying to do that on that side. And then the other side, which is so interesting to me, as being an African American and person of color, is making sure that we have a seat at that table. Because when the plant was in the black market and it was illegal, we participated. We participated with arrests and incarceration, the private prisons, which were built to house us, breaking up of families, the forfeitures, the fine, what have you. We participated in that. Now that it's in the green market and going to a green market and there's billions of dollars being left, we're less than 1%. So I want to make our community aware of the medicinal benefits of this plant and also the economic benefits of this plant, because there's a lot of trepidation in the people of colors and African American and Latino community about cannabis, because it kicked their ass for 50 years. And they've seen their kids and their grandkids and their fathers and their uncles and aunts be arrested for this plant.
And something that was really unfair when states first started legalizing marijuana was this felony exclusion for people who wanted to get licenses to participate to be participating in the legal retail sales. And if you thought about just how backwards that was, I mean, the very people who were being targeted and who were being over-incarcerated were the same people who were more likely to not be able to be participating in the legal industry because of previous convictions. And it just was totally, this was a point that was being made for a long time, but Michelle Alexander really, really helped elevate,
She has a great book.
She does have a great book, The New Jim Crow. Speaking of Michelle Alexander, we have a big conference. The biggest thing the Drug Policy Alliance does is the International Drug Policy Reform Conference. It's every 2 years, and in 2 weeks, we will be in Atlanta for the 2017 Reform Conference. Michelle Alexander will be giving the opening keynote speech.
Wow.
We are very, very excited about that. It's her first time coming to the Reform Conference. Are you going to be in Atlanta, Marvin?
I gave you my word, but I got to check because there's some other stuff that's jammed up against that. There are so many things that are happening that weekend. And if on a personal level, I want to be in Atlanta, but on a business level, I might have to be out west. But I would definitely try. I would definitely try in earnest to be there.
You did give me your word. No, I'm just kidding. Let's talk about that uphill battle you had when we first. I mean, if folks just Google, the NFL needs to rethink marijuana, it spells it out. It makes the case. Talk about why you face so much opposition from the former and current players who and were trying to get sign on to that letter.
It was absolutely crazy because I wasn't the first one. But I think at that time, the guys that were out, it was a handful. And now to look at it 4 years later, there's over 100 guys that are out. And people were still under that 80-year lie about, it being a gateway drug and it can mess up your community and makes you lazy and lethargic. And a lot of guys were protecting their income because they were still doing stuff with the NFL. And its affiliates. And so we couldn't get a lot of traction on that. Not at all. But I believe 4 years later, and now what has happened since then, I think we can do something. I think we can get a strong coalition of athletes to sign on to this, because I think what we did is more relevant now than it was then, and we can have an impact on it.
Before we get out of here, I mean, we'd be remiss. Who you got your money on for the Super Bowl this year? Because we'd love to have you back, to talk a little bit more about that and take that opportunity, with everybody paying attention to the Super Bowl. Do you even follow anymore?
I follow it, but not as closely as I used to. But, Tom Brady's still there, so it's hard to pick against them. Kansas City looks good. So those are my front runners in the AFC. And in the NFC, Atlanta. They played this weekend, Atlanta and Detroit. I really like Detroit. I think they're going to be there in the end, Atlanta. NFC East, the Cowboys, if Ezekiel Elliott can stay in the field, they're a contender. So those are the team. I thought Seattle would, but they can't protect their quarterback. And the Giants cannot protect their quarterbacks. And I just don't understand these teams. If you have a franchise quarterback, you need to draft an offensive lineman every year till you get it right, and put some help around him so he can stand back up there and pick off defense. Because if you give Tom Brady 4 seconds, 5 seconds to throw it, he's going to get to the open guy. Eli Manning can do the same thing. He has no time.
He has no time.
Russell Wilson can do the same thing. He has no time. That just boggles my mind that they would not put a competent, above average offensive line around these players.
Speaking of calling things, I called the Broncos Seahawks Super Bowl. I have this draft op-ed in my Microsoft Word folder from like October of that season about how, marijuana was legalized last year and the marijuana is going to be in the Super Bowl this year. Always write that piece. Marvin wrote that great piece a few years ago. We've gotten him to talk about this. Always write the blog if you have the blog in mind. That's going to be one of my closing thoughts.
That's the DPA way. Always write the piece. Thank you for joining us for Drugs and Stuff. Listen, if you like what you heard, be sure to review us on iTunes and make sure you subscribe and tell all your friends. Talk to us on Twitter. Derek, hit us again with the Twitter handle. We want to hear from you.
So we're at Drugs and Stuff, DPA. That's drugs, the letter N, stuff, DPA. Definitely tweet us your thoughts. Marvin, I believe you're on Twitter at mwash52. Not too active, but speaking of Twitter, let's just get closing thoughts on this weekend's Twitter stream about the NFL. I mean, guys like Reggie Bush, LeBron James probably had the tweet of the weekend. LaShawn McCoy. I mean, just guys coming out. I mean, it was really, really exciting.
I know they did it as a reaction to 45. And so now that they've done this, I hope it becomes progress to, we come out with some definitive plans for socially active players to take this to the community, try to engage law enforcement and first responders. Because we're not against them. We're not against military people. And that's one of the things that I got attacked first time on Twitter by somebody calling me an idiot and saying that I don't support our military. And that kind of offended me, and especially on IG, it offended me because I support our military, because my father right now is buried in a military cemetery down in Texas. And he volunteered when he was 17 years old in 1944 to fight for this country. And he didn't have full rights back home. So you can't tell me about sacrifice and patriotism, because my father was the ultimate patriot. And this has nothing to do with the flag. This has nothing to do with national anthem. This has something to do with social justice and civil rights, or lack thereof. And I don't understand why people can't see it that way, and we're not asking for anything. We're just asking for an equal playing field and equality. But I can't believe that we are still here in this place. And I've seen this happen, throughout my lifetime. And, this is something that we're relitigating. And I thought we had made more progress in that. But I'm happy to have this conversation. And it's something that should be had. And I want to be part of the conversation and the solution.
Yeah, I can't understand why anybody would want to talk slick to a 6'6", 285 former NFL player, but that's just me.
On social media, everybody's 6'9", 300 pounds, 4% body fat, and they want to kick your butt, and the first word out their mouth is you're an MF and an F word. That's their refrain. Like, you say something to them, and that's their refrain. So I do know how. I'm not very active on it, but I do know now, because I call my daughter, know how to block people.
Well, here at Drugs and Stuff, we keep it 5'10". So on behalf of Marvin Washington, thank you so much for joining us. On behalf of my tag team partner, Derek Rosenfeld, and all the good people at Drug Policy Alliance, I'm Tommy McDonald. You've been listening to Drugs and Stuff. Make sure to subscribe on iTunes and drop us a nice 5-star review if you like what you heard. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.
Stay classy.
Drugs and Stuff is brought to you by the Drug Policy Alliance. If you like what you hear on the podcast, do us a favor and rate the show on iTunes. Give it 5 stars and a nice review. Also, we love to hear from you. Tweet at us at drugsandstuffdpa, use the hashtag drugsandstuff, and check out our website drugpolicy.org to see the other work we do, sign up for our emails, and donate. Special thanks to our producer, Katherine Heller, and to the hardworking staff of the Drug Policy Alliance for all of their work. Thanks for listening.